Welcome to a special video on one of my favorite RPGs, Final Fantasy VI. As I said before, this is the kind of game I will never LP. However, I still want to have this game represented here in a way, hence this video. Its purpose is to help you realize the depth this game has, a depth that may not be so apparent at first glance, and make you better at the game as well. Note that there will be spoilers aplenty. Then again, this isn't meant for people who've never played the game before, so if you're one of them, feel free to press the back button on your browser. This is heavily inspired by Meeple Lard's excellent character FAQ on GameFAQs, but is meant to be a more simple and straightforward assessment of each character's strengths and weaknesses. If you want to see the whole detailed thing, I will insert a link to that FAQ in the movie description. As a side note, I apologize for the lack of background music in this series. I know that this is what I usually do when I make videos such as this, but I've already spent so many hours putting this together. I don't want to spend even more doing something that, overall, won't improve the videos very much. Before we get started, though, I want to introduce you to a few key concepts that can make or break a character. First is a notion known as Esper time. As you're no doubt aware, if you've ever played this game, past a certain point, each of your characters can equip a single Esper that will permanently boost your stats when you gain a level, as well as teach you magic. Esper time is defined as the time during which a character can be in your party, and as a result can be taught magic, and more importantly in the long term, boost your stats as well. Depending on where you are in the game, you may not have access to all your characters, so those who miss out on a particular area of the game also miss out on potential Esper time. And before you ask, yes, it's a tedious exercise to micromanage your Espers so that you get the specific boosts you want on a given character while not sacrificing magic acquisition, but it'll save you a lot of hassle later on. 6 stats can be boosted by Espers: HP, MP, Strength, Magic, Speed, and Stamina. Which stat you want to boost on each character is very easy to figure out. Strength on your physical attackers, and Magic on your magic users. Boosting HP, while it may sound compelling at first, just doesn't have nearly as much of an impact as boosting your offense. MP woes are made irrelevant by the Osmose spell once you have it, and speed increases are barely noticeable at all. Stamina is especially bad, as it doesn't just increase the HP recovered by regen and relics that have the same effect, but they increase the damage taken by poison and seizure statuses as well, so don't touch stamina at all. Another very important thing to mention is that this is a game where magic is king. Period. And I'm not talking about just the magic command either, but about any attack that runs on the magic stat, such as all of Sabin's good blitzes, Setzer's slots, or Strago's lures, for example. Anything that's physical based will take a lot of work to bring to the level of magic. This is because of how your damage output correlates with the corresponding stat. For instance, let's take a magic attack that runs off a magic stat of, say, 30, and assume it does the arbitrary number of 500 damage. If that same attack runs off a stat of 60, it'll do 1,000 damage, and off a stat of 90, it'll do 1,500 damage. Got it? Good. Now let's take a physical attack that runs off 30 strength and does the same 500 damage. If your strength is 60, instead of doing 1,000, it'll do much less than that, say 600. And off 90 strength, it'll be 700 instead of 1,500. This may be under the hood stuff, but because of that, physical attackers are at an immediate disadvantage as your caster's magic stat becomes higher and higher. So you may be wondering, why don't I make every character a caster? Simply put, there are ways to make physical damage work with characters such as Lock and Shadow, and besides, if you go that route and boost magic on all your characters, the likes of Sign will still be overwhelmingly overshadowed by everyone else. So now that you've got that in mind, how about we start looking at those characters? First up is our main character, Tara Branford. She's often revered as the best character in the game, and while I don't really agree with that sentiment, it's through no fault of her own. Tara really kicks major ass. Not in the story, mind you, where she is portrayed as a weak-spined wimp the whole way through, but in battle it's a whole different story. Her special skill is Trance, also known as Morph in the SNES version. When used, she transforms into her Esper form for a limited time, and while in that form, all damage you inflict with her is doubled. And she also takes half damage from most magical attacks. And when I say most, I mean all magic attacks that don't pierce defense and don't do fixed damage. Unfortunately, it's only available after you get her back in your party after the Magitech Research Facility, when she's come to grips with her own identity. When you get her back in the World of Ruin, the maximum length of Trance also doubles. Said length is fueled by AP. You know the AP that you use to gain magic from Espers at the end of each battle? When you obtain AP, you recharge your Trance meter and are able to use it longer and longer. But, as I said before, there's a cap. You can't just grind AP and then use Trance for half an hour. The nature of that skill makes it one that you can't afford to use every single battle. You're expected to store AP for the big fights that count, namely bosses. This makes Tara into a monstrous boss killer, which greatly enhances her reputation. One important thing to mention about this ability, and which applies only to Game Boy Advance players, is that none of the enemies fought in the Dragon's Den give any AP, which means you can't recharge your Trance meter unless you leave. And trust me, you don't want to leave that place unless you got a much better reason than that. So I suggest you keep Trance for the Kaiser Dragon or something, despite the Dragon's Den being a place where many random battles are as difficult as any boss. Beyond Trance, Tara is a surprisingly well-rounded character. It may not look like it since the story screams that Tara equals magic. But even though she has a great base magic stat, her physical abilities are actually workable, mostly thanks to a wide array of equipment options. I've mentioned it before, but it's worth repeating. Trance makes Tara a character you definitely want to have around for boss fights, and instead of being obsoleted by fighter magic like so many special skills are, it complements them. Tara also benefits from decent Esper time, only missing out on the Magitech Research Facility, where the stat boosts you get aren't that good due to you not having access to the really good Espers yet, and the early World of Ruin, which isn't that much of a problem since after you get the Falcon, Tara is so easy to get back you'll probably go for her first, despite the story steering you towards Cyan instead. While Tara is widely considered a top-tier character, make no mistake, you won't be getting that impression throughout the first few hours of the game. Indeed, she has a pretty bad start, and needs to consume precious MP to deal damage on par with the likes of Edgar or Sabin. That MP is much better kept for healing, which pigeonholes Tara into the role of healer at the beginning of the game. Which makes sense, since only she and Celeste have access to magic at that point. However, when you get her back after the Magitech Research Facility, she suddenly becomes a lot more versatile. Not only does she gain access to spells like Fyra, Thundara, Blizzara, Cura, Osmos, and so on, but her weapon selection is a lot more impressive. You can use the Morning Star to use your physical attack from the back row, and you can also use the elemental swords to either hit weaknesses physically or boost your magic stat. I should also note that as far as defensive gear goes, Tara can use a wide variety of armor, helms, and shields, and as a result will never really fall behind. Oh, and I can't stress this enough. Keep her magic up to date at all times. Whenever you get an Esper with interesting spells, Tara should always be among the first characters to learn these spells. Things only get better in the World of Ruin, as she gains access to some of the best equipment in the game. The Minerva Bustier, which is one of the game's Elite 3 armors, so to speak, and is exclusive to her and Celeste, as well as some of the strongest swords in the Ragnarok, Lightbringer, and Apocalypse. The last one is only in the GBA version, and is thoroughly outclassed by the Lightbringer anyway. It would still be interesting if you could still obtain only one Lightbringer, like in the other versions, But a special feature of the Game Boy Advance version is that when you defeat Kefka, you get to keep the loot you stole from him, and that includes the Ultima weapon and Ragnarok you can snag from his third form. For that reason, you can now have infinite Lightbringers, which suddenly makes the Ragnarok Esper into the better choice over the sword when you're asked to choose between the two in Narsh. Either way, the Lightbringer is by far Terra's best weapon, and if you're playing the SNES version, you're going to have a tough choice to make as to whoever gets it. If you choose someone else, like Celeste, most likely, you can always fall back on the Enhancer instead. In the Game Boy Advance version, however, there is simply no excuse to not use the Lightbringer. Although you get it later, you're going to love it in the Dragon's Den. I guess now is a good time to point out that shield accessibility in the late game isn't that much of a problem, as all characters except for Umaro can use all of the best shields, which are the Paladin Shield, the Genji Shield, the Force Shield, the Thunder Shield, and the Aegis Shield. Do note that you only get one Paladin Shield, though, so choose carefully which character needs it the most. As I've said before, Terra is a surprisingly versatile character, and her physicals aren't totally wasted. So you can choose to raise her as a fighter or as a mage, whichever one you like. However, do keep in mind that, as I said earlier, magic is king in this game, so I strongly recommend you take her down that path. On the other hand, Locke Cole is the closest thing to a pure physical fighter this game has to offer, due to his lack of magic prowess and a special skill that's insignificant in combat. Locke is the resident thief, although you might not want to say that to his face, and his signature ability allows him to treasure hunt an enemy. The base success rate is 50%, to which you either add Locke's level advantage or subtract the enemy's level advantage. Each enemy has up to 2 potential items that can be stolen, a common steal that's selected 7 times out of 8, or a rare steal that's selected otherwise. Note that some enemies only have a rare steal, so if Locke attempts to steal from the common slot, he will always fail. Equipping the Brigand's Glove, which is a waste as far as I'm concerned, transforms Steel into Mug, which adds a normal attack to the Steel attempt. As I said before, Locke is a physical attacker, and should never be used as anything else. High strength, the game's best speed, and a bad magic stat make sure of that. His early game is absolutely pitiful, both because of his lack of an offensive special skill and because of uninteresting equipment options. But fortunately, things get a lot better for him as the game goes on. Never enough to be qualified as a top-tier character, but he should always be your go-to guy if you need physical strength. Fortunately, it's very easy for him to rack up those stat boosts in the Whirl of Balance, as well as learn some magic, because he's always available for you to use in every arc of the story. He's even forced into your party for some of them, so it's strongly recommended that you make Locke as good as possible for when that time comes. Unfortunately, his Esper time is quite a bit lower in the World of Ruin, since he's found at the end of the Phoenix Cave, which is a long, arduous dungeon, which requires 2 full parties of 4. Well, it's not a hard requirement, but it's still strongly recommended that you have at least 8 characters before going in.